Welcome back, baby cakes. We got another hot reflection for you today on the Daily Vedantic. The reflection for today is on one of my favorite poems. It's in 2 or 3 of Swami's books. And at different lectures in the ashram, he'll drop this poem and the reference to this poem because it is such a great articulation of humanity at large. The poem is by John Godfrey Saxe, and it's called The Blind Men and the Elephant. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll read the beginning. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and, happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. God bless me, but the elephant is nothing but a wall. Each blind man goes through this experience of touching a part of the elephant. An ear and thinks it's a fan. A tail and thinks it's a snake. A leg and thinks it's a tree trunk. Each of the blind men not only feel a part of the reality, but they are certain of what the totality of the reality is just with their fractional perception of the elephant. It is quite interesting how we know as humans, we know how little of just our mundane terrestrial universe we can perceive. We only see a fraction of light waves. We only hear a fraction of sound waves. We know that 95% of the measurable, this is the measurable universe, is imperceptible to us, whether it's dark energy or dark matter. It's 95% of the measurable universe is unknowable to us. We don't know what it is. And yet, in the midst of all of these things that we quote unquote know, that the measurable, perceivable universe is only 5% of what's going on, that we can only see a fraction of light waves, that we only see a fraction, we only hear a fraction of sound waves, that in the midst of these limitations, we still declare that we know what's going on. One of my favorite stories of the afterlife, and on the topic of the afterlife, is from Joseph, one of my teachers that I host. He's the co-host of Yoga for Your Intellect. And in one of our episodes, he was talking about his grandfather. He was sitting with his grandfather. He's about 15 or 16 years old in West Texas, looking out into this expanse of this ranch and that he was on with his grandfather. And he said, "What do you think happens after we die, Grandpa?" And his grandfather, I love this story from Joseph, and his grandfather sat there for a second, and he was known to be a really sage soul, sat there for a second and said, "I think we'll be surprised." What a great answer. Very, very different than how my Catholic grandmother would have answered such a question. Very different from another family member that answered that question recently to our 7-year-old daughter, with a lot of certainty in the midst of known ignorance. We know we have no idea what's going to happen in the afterlife. We know, quote unquote, know that we cannot perceive or measure 95% of what's going on. And yet we find ourselves speaking with such certainty on things that we have no authority to speak on. The second feeling of the tusk cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp. To me, 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." Touching the tusk and this partial perception, saying, "Oh, this isn't some big exotic animal. It's just a huge spear." We have experience and perception of partial reality, and from that, we extrapolate to this certainty of knowing what the totality is. We are all the blind men of Hindustan. Did you know Hindustan means land of rivers? Indus River. It would either called Indostan or Hindustan. Stan means land, and Indo comes from the Indus River, riverland. And we are all the blind men of Hindustan, feeling around. The mistake isn't to not be able to perceive it all. The mistake is to pretend in our ignorance, to proclaim in our ignorance that we can, that we do, that we are seeing it all clearly. I mentioned it in the last episode, or maybe the one before, that old Socrates quote of wisdom begins in wonder. Wisdom begins in those three beautifully scary words of I don't know. Every great adventure begins with a surrender into the unknown. And there is no greater adventure than to explore the depths, to plumb the depths of who we truly are deep down. There is no greater adventure to explore that, to surrender, to fall into not knowing the answer for who we are deep down, for what this is deep down. Not the partial perception and the extrapolation and proclaiming that we know the totality, but starting with we don't know, starting with wonder, starting with, man, the worst thing I can do in this exploration is to feel a tusk and say it is a spear. It's to feel the broad and sturdy side and say, well, this is obviously just a stone wall. It's okay to be blind, but to be blind and certain of what we quote unquote see, that's a dangerous combination. As Swami will say, it's one thing to have a disease. That's bad enough, but to not know that you have it is fatal. To be certain that you don't have it is fatal. The highest virtue within this philosophy is the capacity to discern. It's discernment, often called the crown jewel. The crown jewel of virtues, discernment. Viveka, as it's described in Sanskrit. To discern the unreal from the real, the permanent from the impermanent. To discern. To be quite cautious of ever applying the two words, I know, to any perception, to any experience. To comfortably and powerfully wield the sword of I don't know. Or said another way, to be open to a surprise. That is philosophy. And that is the beginning of wisdom. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.